Hello team, this topic is about the queuing mechanism and priority handling of transactions within the CDS itself. So right now we have a user story that is trying to achieve a different level of use cases. So let me just review some of the ideas that we discussed.
You're not sharing.
I'm not sharing? Okay, 1 second.
Thank you.
Okay. So currently CDS does not support the queuing mechanism, but there are use cases that have been identified where we could support multiple transactions within the device, especially if we support, let's say, customers and you're configuring, let's say, a bunch of VLANs on it or interfaces. And you're getting, parallel transactions to execute a configuration, download or delete, whatever it may be. So the first user story is kind of covering the feature for priority. So what we wanted to identify in this user story is essentially that when we generate our configurates, that the configurates could have a different set of priorities. There could be configurates that have higher priority than other configurates within a given action. So the first user story, what it's trying to specify is that we want to model what is the priority that an action has. So within the action, you can have multiple, let's say, multiple configurates that are generated, which could be multiple transactions. And within that action, you want to set as the priority 1, 2, and 3. And the higher the priority, those are the set of transactions that will be executed first within your queue itself. So what we're defining as the requirement is to recognize the modeling of priority of execution within your queuing mechanism, and that all the configurates within that actions are aggregated and executed together. So if you have, let's say, two requests that come in, two actions that are coming in together, if you're executing one action, you want to make sure you execute that entire aggregation of configurates before you move on to the next action itself. So that's the first user story. That's what it's kind of moving and describing. Any questions on this one? Does this make sense, Alexi? Okay, so here I gave also an example of how we do config deploy, for example. If there, Alexi, you okay?
Yes.
Okay. Any other feedback? If there's no other feedback, we move on to the next user story. So the next user story is also talking about, that our queuing mechanism is non-blocking as well. So if we have multiple devices, resources that we want to support, that we have the request coming in, we want to, and it could have different protocols regardless, right? Of the protocol, you want to make sure that the CDS supports a mechanism where it can trigger multiple devices within its priority itself. And you can see there are things that they're describing that we have a same resource handler within a single action, or different resource multi-threaded action within a single action and a resource. So I'm describing like different use cases itself. So maybe I can go through each of the three use cases, and we can discuss them if it doesn't make if it's not clear. So in the current release, the CDS mechanism shall support a sequential transaction communication within a given resource. Thus, if a thread is opened with the VNF resource instance and a new action is added to the queue, CDS will wait until the progress thread is completed before opening a new thread to the NF resource. Any questions on that? The CBA package shall be extended to support in the future release also parallel multi-threaded communication within the same resource. So I want to keep that in mind. Today we're saying we want to do it sequentially, but in the future we also may want to open it to a multi-threaded transaction within a single resource. And that multi-threaded of how many threads can be done should be modeled as well. So that's what this note is referring to.
So is that within the same request, or so you don't have multi-threaded if there's two CBAs that are being called in that are accessing the same device? You're blocking them.
Can you say that one more time?
So say there is two CBAs that are targeting the same device, and they cannot be executed at the same time.
We want to make sure that each action that you put in the queue is sequential. That's the first requirement, right? The second requirement is also, we're saying long term, what we also want to do is model that you can support multiple within an NF resource, multiple transaction as well.
Yeah, so understood that, but like it seems like here you're trying to model within the CBA, but are you saying that the multi-threading is?
Well, all I'm saying that within the CBA you can model how many, if you want to support multi-threaded or not.
Okay.
So.
You will be agreeing a switch. They allow.
Yes, within the CBA, because in some. Right, it's because some, depending on the packages or your use cases, you might support it or you may not support it. If it's the same device, most likely the model will be the same, either enable or disable for multi-threading within the same NF device. Yes.
Transaction management takes care of rollback if something fails on the
No, rollbacks is something that is modeled. Transaction management is more of saying that if you get a request in the queue, make sure you send the request in the proper priority and in the proper sequence as well. But rollback is something like, rollback occurs is something, let's say, if you have a failure use case, right? Then you have to take an action of rollback, and that action of rollback will be sent to transaction management if it's going to a device, right? So that is more of like modeling of your package of how you handle within a given action rollback activities for failures. But transaction management is a standalone component that deals with just queuing, prioritization, and.
For me, transaction implies rollback.
Oh, it does? Well, you can have an action that is doing, configuration, change management, failures, rollbacks, whatever it could be. So maybe there's a more proper word instead of transaction. Please suggest it, I'll change it.
But to your point, though, transaction could not trigger the rollback. You may not get triggered a rollback within the transaction. What if your transaction is complete here, but some other transaction failed, and now
you need to roll back
this transaction? So you may have a CDS transaction.
To me, transaction is based on the asset principle where it's atomic. Everything is atomic.
Yeah.
Okay, we have that also covered. So that's a use case. We'll also talk about like how to do atomic transactions itself.
And would that be specifically for VNF?
No, I said XNF.
Or it also includes, like, for instance, we deploy VNF, we have VNF configuration, and we have PNF configuration.
It's for any resource, XNF, XNF, yeah. So, and the network function, whatever resource you have, right? It could be VNF, PNF, CNF, VF module, whatever you are having as a resource.
And the serialization of this, where you say you could be in kind of two-step, where the first one you serialize based on the XNF, but I would assume so that if, like Munir stated in his example, if you have two different VNFs that are being instantiated and both requires PNF configuration, which are different CBA and whatever, do we serialize access to the PNF?
So, okay, this is bringing, no, this is a very good question, and this is part of this topic, but it brings the fact that we don't have a device notion today in CDS, okay? So that PNF, okay, it's a resource, but today in your script and so on, at no point in time you make a reference to a device, right? You're seeing it as, okay, connection with an IP and a port and a PACAX account, but you don't. So if we want the ability to have this queuing mechanism cross CBA, cross transaction, I think it boils down to the fact we need to have a notion of device. But
I just want to understand the scope of this. So this is the scope.
I think this is a part.
Serialized per CBA.
No.
No, serialization at the for a given action.
For a given resource, exactly.
Within a given resource itself.
So if
but that action can have multiple configlets, so you want to make sure
yes,
that you...
but the priority is, let's tackle one at a time.
Sure.
The priority, you're right, an action can have multiple configlets and one can... But let's just put that aside for a minute. That's the first user story. Now, this user story is more about the fact that for the platform itself, whenever you receive an action for a given resource ID, resource type, so if it's a PNF, the same PNF can be used by two CBAs, right?
Correct.
Now, let's assume that we don't have any notion of device, but we based all the logic on the notion of that resource ID, resource type. So if we know that, hey, I'm currently treating something for this combo of resource ID, resource type, and I receive another request, I need to queue it.
Okay.
And yeah, so that's the first, I think, premise of this, is as we don't have any notion of device, we can use the notion of resource ID, resource type. But it's not true that the resource ID, resource type is going to refer to a device necessarily. It's true for a PNF. It's not true for a VNF. Yeah, so then for the VNF, you want to be more granular, because the VNF can have multiple VF modules. I don't know, we're treated every day. For the VNF, you can have multiple VF modules, and you might have config to apply on different VF modules. But so if you provide as an input the resource type an ID as a VNF, then you might log the whole...
All VF module.
All the VF. So things need to be well thought through, because an action is bound to one resource ID, resource type, not multiple.
Okay, I think
There is this idea as well. But so, Yuri, does this fall in the line of what you had in mind as well, or?
Yes, it's within the resource definition, and the resource definition is usually within the scope of the VNF, PNF, or VF module. The only thing is, if we don't have use cases for customers, but for customers, I think we might, there's...
Why would it change? For instance, we have like a SD1 service. This is for a customer, right?
Right. What I'm trying to say that the configlet management is done at the VLAN level, right? Itself, or it could be VRF level. So it's not just necessarily VNF. So what I'm trying to get back at is that for customers, I guess you still want to lock the VNF, right? Or PNF or VF module. So you always operate in that
sequential fashion
at that level, but the uniqueness of the operation is, can be at the VLAN itself and not at the VNF level.
Oh, you mean you can look at the uniqueness per the network resource?
Yeah.
Rather than the...
I think we have to, in a way, kind of make sure that when we define what the key is for these transactions, there's some sort of separation so that we understand what is a PNF ID, or PNF name, and the VF module name itself, because otherwise our current keys could be composite keys that includes VNF ID plus VLAN ID to make a connection itself. So we want to make sure that that part is decoupled so that we can queue it up correctly.
Let me try to step back a little bit from what you said, is that resource ID or resource type, you're saying it could be a connection point?
But if you have a customer, the customer owns a VLAN, for example.
Yes.
right? They're different customers, right? Customer 1, customer 2, customer 3. They own different VLANs. The execution is VLAN level, right? But when we are queuing things up, we have to make sure we queue it up at the device level and not the VLAN level for those set of actions.
Right.
Yeah.
But so, yes.
So we want to make
Oh, you mean the resource is going to be VLAN?
The key could be a combination of VNAP ID plus, you want to make sure that there's a way to identify what is the device itself that we're working on.
But then it should just be done at a higher up resource.
Yes.
Device.
You can take the resource higher up. Instead of providing as input, that's what I was telling Seb is, if you have a VNF with multiple VF modules, or if you have a PNF with multiple VLANs, when you need to execute an action on the PNF, if the action is at the VLAN level, you want to treat other VLAN action for this PNF as, you want to have them executed sequentially. Then you can treat the PNF as the resource rather than the VLAN.
Right, we have to, I think, account for that.
And so you need to,
You just need to have a mechanism to retrieve that key if it's not, provided as part of the input. If it's always provided as input, then it's much more simpler.
Well, resource ID, resource type is provided as an input. So that's actually the premise of
what you're trying to achieve.
Yes.
Okay.
Is like the caller will always tell, I'm doing this action in CDS for this given resource type, resource ID. But you're right. Today this is not the, maybe I should have clarified.
Just the resolution key.
Yes.
That's a host name. It could be.
But I'd rather formalize
resource ID.
ID resource type because this is more broader scope and it covers more use cases, whereas resolution key is more, it's more of like, you want to do a POC, can use resolution key, or there might be a good use case for resolution key. But I think resource ID, resource type is more broader scope. And actually so Oleg is, I think, is assigned to this story, or he's not, but if he had been there, this is what he's looking into. How he can make this using resource type, resource ID.
So the notion of resource and queuing or multi-threading only applies to resources that are in AI.
No.
Don't want to say AI.
No,
but
the resource type and resource ID that is provided as input.
Yeah.
So I'm talking here, or we're talking here mostly about NAI resources, but it could be anything.
Okay.
Right.
At the end of the day, it can be anything. But it makes sense to tie them to NAI if you're in an ONAP end-to-end service. But if you're using CDS for some other things, the resource ID, resource type concept is still valuable. But it can be
whatever that external.
But it can, exactly, yeah, absolutely. And that, to that point, to your point, is then how do you identify this ID? And what I'm thinking is you provide it as an input always.
Okay. So, any question on the first set of requirements? A use case? So the other use case is that there are different resources that we want to multi-thread with a single action. So the CDS queue and mechanism shall support the ability to spawn multiple threads to process actions on a different resource that shall support a high volume of throughput rate, connecting to various XNF protocols such as NetConf, RESTConf, gRPC, Ansible, and Chef, or ODL itself. Okay, so this is what we discussed. Then we have a use case that says different resource handling within a single action for a group of resources. So again, this is you are doing a multi-thread here to process the actions on different resources within a single action. All the transaction within a group of resources must be processed before picking up a new transaction with the different actions to the same resources. So it's a more complex use case itself,
yes.
But the idea is still the same, that we want to make sure that we are within an action, that aggregation of resource config that we're pushing needs to be processed first before you take on the disk. And I think what we don't probably do today in our biglets table maybe. We don't say that these are all related to a given request or to.
Right.
I think we should also add that
Context.
context, because if something fails, if operation wants to know what are all the transactions for this actions were executed, how do you extract that context? I think that could provide some benefit as well.
Yeah, it's fair enough. Yeah, we could provide the context ID, like transaction ID or request ID or whatever.
So I'm gonna just transaction ID or context ID should be added to the, what's table, what's the name?
Template resolution and resource resolution. I think both they require it.
We can add
Or
one
and the other, yeah.
I guess just let's add it to template resolution and then we can correlate.
Good.
Okay. Any questions here?
Oleg, are you on the audio?
It's coming in 10 minutes. Well,
When was that?
20 minutes ago.
It's recorded, right?
Yes, we're recording.
Because
But
I will be the one implementing, so
we can cover again with Oleg. It's no issue.
I want to make sure it's well on board.
Okay, so then the other idea is that I just put this as a placeholder, but what we were kind of discussing is do we want to classify our actions? Today we don't have any classifications for our actions, so and why may we want to do this? For supporting the embargo idea itself. So you may want to say, you might have an embargo in your network to block all LCM actions or all, customer service add orders or disconnect orders or MACDs, or infrastructure service adds, infrastructure disconnects. So this may require us to classify our actions so that we can correctly place the right embargo in the CDS implementation itself. So this is a placeholder that we just added as something that we want to think about doing in the future release itself. Any comments here? And lastly, let me. Okay, so the classification is basically tied to the locking mechanism, and here we're, once we have the classification, then we can have a capability for locking the different locking mechanism and within CDS. So this is a user story dealing with, based on your classification, you can support different lock mechanism itself. Okay, so the only here I wasn't sure if, do we want to check AI for these flags, or do we want to capture the PNF and the resource inventory that we're dealing with?
Or the embargo type of use case?
Yeah.
So I don't know what, even for us, we don't have any process around this today. But I would see the process for an embargo to be go and put the resource in NAI as unavailable. And so I'd rather have CDS check against the resource whether it's available or not, rather than having
the local inventory.
Yes, because all other systems might care about that information, and so I'd rather fetch it from the inventory than from CDS itself. I don't know.
Like IPAM being in service and something that's more on the resource allocation side.
Well, that's different. That's what you're saying is more of a
network resource.
So what if it's another side external system that contributes to the execution of your CDA list?
But that can be checked as part of the execution process to make sure that half of all your microservices are available before you execute it itself.
The designer is responsible for whatever he's...
No, it's not even the designer. He's saying that, let's say Netbox is out of service.
Yes.
And you get a runtime execution.
Yes.
You don't want to execute it, right? Because you know you're going to fail. you want to put it on a lock, maybe send a notification to,
We don't have any process for that today.
right, but this, what we can do is maybe add that idea as a placeholder, to see if we want to support it in the
But
future.
no, because, I mean, I just don't want to go there right now to manage and to gather the state of all the external systems. Do you have in IT something like this, or?
Well, so.
Does it have some?
No, here we're talking about like, enterprise system that
So
you
what
might
do you mean,
have.
like managing the change management windows when you can actually do changes on which device?
So yeah, so there is two things here. Is managing the like, what do you call this? You can't go and configure
Well,
the network.
it's essentially the opposite of change management window. You cannot have a change management
Yes,
window
exactly.
into a brownout period.
Exactly. So managing the brownout period, that's one use case.
Yep.
And the other use case is knowing the state of the external systems that the CBA might use. That's what you're saying, right?
Yes.
So this is
That's a.
that one.
No, but the other one, I would separate like the external system management and health. It's one thing, but change management window, my understanding was like some OS implication in that.
Well, there's a scheduler and OS and, yeah. But, yes, so that, I think that the AI inventory check can help because there's going to be a lock, a maintenance lock in the AI, and we can make sure that we know actions except LTM can be executed for that change management window.
So, okay, but then it
So
was.
his question is more of like, when you execute a runtime CBA, and you wanna, and we know what all the external components we need to communicate, and you know that netbox is down, or whatever other microservice you're trying to call is down, you have that status. Do you wanna not execute that flow and just put that in the queue, and send some sort of ticket by whoever?
Well, yeah.
I don't think we need
So
to
why-
automatically detect this, but it's more a reason to have this feature at the CBA execution level instead of depending on the state of a device. If it's not just the device that is blocker,
Tricky.
I think,
So why don't you do this, like, as a solution, like, let's say for an ADI resource,
moi, je
you know where to check the state, but if you have an external resource, then you need to provide a link where its state can be checked.
Yeah, absolutely.
right, that's a different, it's a different use case and probably a different way of handling itself for execution.
This gets very complex because even, like depending on how, because keep in mind, your executor that will handle some resource resolution or even execute scripts may even be in a different namespace that has access to those systems, but not your blueprints processor.
So I would say that with whatever we want to execute, we probably want to make sure that all the information is available to us, right?
No, but I agree, but there's still a separation between your executor and your blueprints processor. So depending on where you plan to do the checks, it may never actually work to reach the IFM from.
It never might reach the end state itself, although everything is green.
Yeah, it will.
Okay, so I think for now we can just table this idea as well.
Just more thought.
And we can come back to it. We want to
Managing the system is complex.
Well, what
Or the
thing you could
brownout.
do is have what you could do in the interim though, to actually get a sound solution is to have some preconditions before you execute your CBA.
Okay, yeah, go check.
In which you could implement checks.
Yeah, that can be the first step of your CBA. Exactly, precondition to whom we're talking. It's with Dan Way. Or with you, I don't know. You can have a precondition step. Yeah.
Arbitrary preconditions to your CBA execution, or your action execution.
Yes.
Which means check this, check that, and the result is.
I think Brenda at some point also had,
That
this idea of making sure that we check all the,
For each component, we can have precondition.
yes, that everything is available before we execute it.
And then the user to provide that precondition.
So this way, at least you have one way to meet that criteria.
Yeah.
Don't have to build an extensive monitoring framework.
It's managing the CBA.
And you can delegate even that extensive check to another microservice or system.
Yeah.
So any other
Good
So you
idea.
need to consult.
comments on the topics?
Sorry?
Any other comments on this set of topics?
No, I think this is good. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe if we had Oleg, we would have comments.
I'll try to connect with Oleg again, and if we can see, we can do it again today.
Yeah, maybe later today we can quickly go over.
All right, let me stop the recording. Are there